Good morning and welcome back. We will have the very latest on the Singapore summit in just a few moments. But first, some other stories making headlines this morning, starting with a Fox News alert. President Trump's chief economic advisor is recovering from a mild heart attack. Larry Kudlow is in good condition at Walter Reed Medical Center and is expected to make a full recovery. Also breaking right now, 4 children are dead after a day-long standoff with a gunman who shot a cop. Orlando police say Gary Wayne Lindsay also shot and killed himself. He's believed to be the father of 2 of the children. A police officer shot responding to the initial call is recovering. And it's deadline day for the Justice Department. The House Intelligence Committee demanding they hand over documents related to the Russia probe. Committee Chair Devin Nunes says if the DOJ does not comply, it will be considered obstruction of the investigation. Steve.
Thank you, Julia. This is a Fox News alert. Just within the last hour, President Trump making America's message to North Korea very clear.
We are now going to start the process of denuclearization of North Korea, and I believe that he's going back and will start it virtually immediately.
Oh, that sounds good. What happens next? Here with a panel discussion, we've got Hagar Chemali, a former spokesperson for the U.S. mission to the United Nations. Morgan Ortagus, Center Square, is a former State Department press officer. And David Tafuri worked in the State Department under President Obama. Welcome to all of you. Thanks for getting up so early. All right, first question. Can I ask all of you this? On a scale of 1 to 10, how big a deal is this? Hagar.
Oh, I'm going to put it at a 10.
Is it?
Yeah, because, listen, at the end of the day, this is historic regardless of how you look at the deal that came out of this, right? Because you have 2 leaders. It's the first ever sit-down meeting between the leader of the United States and the leader of North Korea. And regardless, it's positive, even though I do think that there are a lot of missing details. There's a lot to work out. But at the end of the day, it's incredibly significant.
Well, ultimately, they did agree to a complete denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula, which is a big deal. So on a scale of 1 to 10, how big a deal is it?
That's a lot of words to say this morning, Steve.
It is, and hard ones.
I mean, I agree with Hagar. It's a 10. I think the difference, what you normally see in the diplomatic process, is you'll have a year of negotiations, for example, leading up to a meeting like this, and then the principals meet at the end. And the president, like he does with many things, has decided to upend that tradition and meet at the beginning. I mean, he's really cutting through layers and layers of diplomacy that normally happens. So this is not a final end product today. This is a commitment by 2 leaders. And I think that the president is right to try something new. What we've really done over the past 20, 30 years is have done negotiations here or there. We've tried to ignore North Korea in many ways because we've been focused on Iraq or Afghanistan. We can't ignore it anymore. It's a nuclear state. You have to try something new. You have to try something unprecedented.
All right, we've got 2 10s so far, David. On a scale of 1 to 10, how big a deal is this?
I'm going to give this a 7 or 8.
Okay, not a shock here.
President Trump handled this very well. He did a long press conference. He answered a lot of questions. It was astounding to watch. Unfortunately, most of America missed it because it happened so early here in America. But the bottom line is they signed an agreement with just broad details, and they agreed to denuclearize. But that agreement was already reached with the president of South Korea. So we need to see more details on what's going to happen, actually. And of course, this is still, Kim Jong-un is still a ruthless dictator. You can't put lipstick on a pig. He hasn't made any real changes yet. So we need to see actual results and change before we can be really excited.
And you know, Hagar, one of the reasons we probably will, and the president said they're going to go and he's going to start dismantling things right away when he goes back to North Korea, is because the sanctions are going to stay in place until their program is just toast.
Right, absolutely. And in fact, first of all, I know that, and Morgan and I can both attest, having worked at the Treasury Department, that Treasury is probably prepared with extra targets to roll out in a moment's notice or extra sanctions policies in the event that things don't go as planned, right? And that North Korea pursues deceptive behavior, which they very well might. But the fact of the matter is, back in 2007, during the 6-party talks, the point about sanctions was it was a sticking point with the North Koreans. It was important to them. They wanted to see sanctions lifted. So that's a really big selling point. It's a very big bargaining chip we have.
Morgan?
Yeah, I think what we need to see happen now is that we should see bipartisan consensus of supporting the president and his team going forward. I think that the president is very smart to have Mike Pompeo continue to lead these negotiations. He clearly is the closest to the North Koreans in terms of having met with them while he was CIA director. And I think Pompeo has shown to be an incredibly tough and skilled negotiator. There's still, as David said, there's still a lot of devil in the details.
Right.
But this, Steve, is the challenge of our generation. The three of us here are foreign policy nerds. We've all worked in government together. We all worked in Iraq, Afghanistan. But dealing with Asia, the pivot to Asia that President Obama talked about is now happening in this administration. Dealing with China, dealing with North Korea. This is my generation's challenge. And so I'm encouraged that we're making progress today. Still a lot to go.
And David, the tough thing is to make sure that this time they don't cheat like they did the last couple of times.
That's right.
So ultimately, how do you figure out a way to verify that they're not cheating?
Well, that's part of the details that need to be worked out. So there need to be
I understand.
inspectors.
Work it out right now.
Yeah.
How would you do it?
Look, President Trump was right to acknowledge in his answers to the questions today that there's a long horizon for true denuclearization. It's going to take 10 to 15 years. So one of the problems
I
is
don't
that
get why it takes so long.
Well, because if you look at a map and you look at North Korea, there are missile and nuclear sites all over the country, right? And so you have to go into each of those sites. You have to, first of all, disarm the nuclear weapons he has now. You have to stop the production of uranium. And then you have to take out all of the equipment, right? And you have to have inspectors to do all of that in a country that's very close.
Trump is not going to wait 15 years.
I don't think he's going to wait. And also, Kim Jong-un does not want to wait 15 years because he wants return on this right away. He needs the relief right away. So that's one of the problems. He's not going to be patient about this. But we need to be patient and phase in sanctions relief.
All right. Great discussion this morning, David and Morgan and Hagar. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Terrific. All right. Meanwhile, most of the attention is on denuking, but there is another part of President Trump's agreement that is important to many American families. Listen.
I must have had just countless calls and letters. They want the remains of their sons back. I asked for it today, and we got it. The remains will be coming back.
That is big. Ed Henry says this is a very big deal. He's going to join us live from Singapore with details. You're watching a special edition of Fox and Friends.
Yesterday's conflict does not have to be tomorrow's war. And as history has proven over and over again, adversaries can indeed become friends. We can honor the sacrifice of our forefathers by replacing the horrors of battle with the blessings of peace. And that's what we're doing, and that's what we have done.
And those are the scripted comments from the president. But then he went and took an hour of unscripted questions after going 5 hours with negotiating with North Korea. Prior to that, flying 21 hours in the plane. So he's been up for quite a while, as is Ed Henry, Fox News' chief national correspondent, anchoring a lot through the night for us and through the morning. Ed, it seemed to us that the president was quite pleased at what took place. What's the mood on the ground?
Mood on the ground among White House staff is pretty jubilant, because I got to say, if you followed our coverage step by step overnight, the president was hearing about some of the coverage back in the United States, 12 time zones away. And if you listen to some other channels, they were saying that this whole thing was falling apart. Why? Because of one little detail that in the end did not matter one whit, which is that Kim Jong-un told the White House staff that he wanted to leave this afternoon, just a few hours after they first started meeting. The president, who originally said he was going to fly Air Force One back tomorrow, said, okay, I'm going to fly back today as well. That set off this frenzy of media claims that, oh, this is falling apart, they're going home early, there's not going to be any victory here. And instead, it was just the idea that the president believed all along that within a few hours space, they had already done a lot of the groundwork before they ever met behind closed doors. And he knew he could get the deal done, and he got it it done, and yet there are still critics out there saying, this is no big deal. You're seeing Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer saying absolutely nothing in terms of statements and social media. And I'm fascinated. If you look at the New York Times Twitter feed, about 14, 16 hours ago, they had a story up there saying that they're still miles apart, the U.S. and North Korea, and their international editor sent out a tweet saying something to the effect of, a few hours ago, Kim Jong-un has already won a lot. What are you talking about? Kim Jong-un has won? It's a polar opposite.
Yeah, Ed, when we were all going to bed and many of our viewers were going to bed, we knew the meeting was last night at 9 o'clock Eastern time, and we expected to have some sort of a press conference at some point. And I actually went to bed with the TV on. I was watching your coverage and just waking up periodically because I wanted to keep up with it. And about 1:30, I happened to wake up and I'm watching the screen, and then you see that table where they sign the document, and we see a man come out with white gloves, and he puts a pen in front of each of the two chairs, and then they come out together and they sign this document. Did you guys get a heads up about that? Was that a shock to you?
Yeah, what happened was shortly before that, again, as you say, all this happening in the middle of the night in the United States, and we're trying to follow every tea leaf that might tell us something. After their working lunch, I believe, President Trump just came out and said, we're going to sign something. We're going to sign something. He didn't say what, a document, a peace deal, an agreement. And so that sent us off on a frenzy because we were starting a live broadcast and we're trying to figure out what are they going to sign. They went behind closed doors, talked about it. And then, as you say, Ainsley, you're exactly right. They put out 2 chairs, 2 pens, a North Korean official with white gloves laying it all out very carefully. And then they had U.S. and North Korean flags. Again, critics are saying, why is a U.S. flag next to the North Korean flag? Well, do you want to bury your head in the sand and say that we're never, ever going to talk for another 60 or 70 years? Here's another little nugget, by the way, you might have missed while you were sleeping, which is that our cameras and our audio mics at one point picked up Kim Jong-un's interpreter saying that Kim told President Trump something to the effect of, many people in the world will think of this as a form of fantasy from a science fiction movie. And I found that particularly fascinating because it's the kind of thing we're thinking about on the outside, this 34-year-old dictator with an almost 72-year-old president. I think his birthday's Thursday. Generations apart. It almost is like a science fiction movie. Just 2 weeks ago, this summit wasn't happening. It had been called off. And now it all came together.
Yeah, Ed, you know, of this, clearly it was a made-for-television event, the way things were staged, where Kim's car came up and then Trump's limousine was there 5 minutes later, and we saw them shake hands, and they went over. There was a TV in the camera in the other room, and then they broke off, and then they came out, they signed something. What would you say were there any unscripted, awkward moments? Because from what we saw, it seemed like it all went off without a hitch.
One negative, one positive. One awkward moment I did see. There's a video online where the president told a little joke about getting ready for one of the many photo ops they had, and he said to the photographers, "Make sure you get a good angle, make us look skinny and really good." And then and he laughed, and then they panned the camera to Kim Jong-un, and he looked like, like, I don't get the joke. It's a funny video if you search for it on Twitter.
That's something we all
the
say before we take a picture, don't we?
And another. Yeah, we want to look skinny. But the other funny thing that worked was, while they were maybe, going back and forth, at some point the president said, "Have you seen my limousine?" And we got this wonderful video of the president bringing Kim Jong-un out to see what we call in the United States the Beast, that massive General Motors vehicle that the president goes around, bulletproof and all the rest. And you saw Kim Jong-un almost like a kid in a candy store. Wow, look at this limo. Look at those tires. And you got to wonder if the president was working it. Was the president working him a little?
Well, that's a little personal.
Look at the toys I have. Hey, you want to open up your economy? Maybe you'll get a car like this.
And he did get a video so he can image what it would be like if North Korea opened up to a market economy.
Here's the video.
In fact, here's the moment when the president said, "Hey, do you want to go see my car?" And
they opened an 800-pound door.
The Beast.
Right. Yeah, we don't show too much.
Well,
no, that's what I was thinking too, Brian.
So,
but I want to talk about
what for the president. But I got to say something. Yeah.
I want to go over the
one quick
things
thing
that
where he slipped up. At the news conference, he was talking about this wonderful video and how they took out the iPad. And at one point, the president said, you know, we had this thing on cassette. And I was saying, was there an 8-track in there, Mr. President, a cassette? Anyway.
Hey, here are the 4 things. Let's take a look together. If people are just waking up or weren't able to stay up last night, the 4 things that were included in the document that they signed. Establish a new relations. Let's start anew. Forget about the past. Build a stable, peaceful regime on the peninsula. Number 3 is reaffirming the April 27, 2018 declaration that North Korea commits to work towards, this is key, complete denuclearization of the Korean peninsula, recovering POW MIA remains, including the immediate repatriation of those already identified. And here's the thing, Ed. A lot of people are saying, what about irrevocable, verifiable, irrevocable elimination of your nuclear program? That wasn't in these documents. He says that's to come.
Yes, and the devil, as I've heard you've been saying, will be in the details, and that's true. And we need to be skeptical. This is not a clear victory. President had a very good day, but he's going to have to follow up, and so is Secretary of State Mike Pompeo. But let me tell you something else that happened here yesterday that might have gotten lost in all of the breaking news and big developments. Mike Pompeo, who's played a pivotal role here, of course, had that one secret meeting over Easter weekend that got all this going. Bottom line is, he said, until we have that clear path to denuclearization, we are not taking the boot off the throat. We're not going easy on the U.S. sanctions. And in fact, Secretary Pompeo told reporters here in Singapore, we have more sanctions that we can roll out. So maybe it's just a threat, but they are not letting the boot off the throat. And by the way, that POW MIA issue is important. It's not just a throwaway. The president says he got that as a late concession. There are thousands of our fellow Americans who never learned what happened to their loved ones in the Korean War, and the president says they're going to get those remains. That is a big deal.
It is. All right, Ed Henry joining us from Singapore, where he looks handsome and thin at 6:43 in the evening.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Eddie.
Thanks, Ed.
All right, still ahead on this historic Tuesday, Anthony Scaramucci is going to be joining us live, Dinesh D'Souza, and Ben Shapiro, all live.
And the president hailing the document he signed with Kim Jong-un, committing to complete denuclearization. But does it hold up legally? Judge Napolitano is here, and that's his headshot.
Good morning to you. We will get back to the latest on the Singapore summit in just a few moments. But first, some other stories making headlines. Accused leaker James Wolf expected in federal court today. The former Senate intelligence staffer will be charged with lying to investigators about
it all on a special.
President Trump wrapping up in Singapore after signing his name next to Kim Jong-un's in an historic summit that our next guest is calling the third great diplomatic thaw in our lifetime. Here to weigh in, conservative filmmaker with the new movie Death of a Nation, out August 3rd, Dinesh D'Souza. Dinesh, good morning to you.
Good morning.
What do you mean third great thaw in our lifetime?
Well, we see in our living memory that history sometimes offers these openings for leaders who are able to seize them. We saw it in the 90s with South Africa, an apartheid regime that absolutely collapsed, disappeared almost overnight. We saw it with Reagan and Gorbachev. Seeing Trump and Kim reminded me of that. The historic opening with the Soviet Union, the relationship between Reagan and Gorbachev, initially an intermediate nuclear forces agreement, but eventually something much more spectacular, the collapse of the Soviet system and regime itself. It takes an element of luck to present these historical opportunities, but it also takes leadership to step to the front and know what to do with them.
Sure.
And what a stunning contrast between Obama's so-called leading from behind and the way that Trump kind of jumps into the forefront, takes things by the horns, and in a sense bends them to his will.
And in fact, Dinesh, the president told Sean Hannity in an interview we ran about 45 minutes ago that it was a tough rhetoric, referring to him as Little Rocket Man and fire and fury that got him to the table. So that, because he's a disruptor and he doesn't do things the way normal politicians do, that's what got him to the table.
Well, if we think back again to Reagan, it's the same thing. Reagan began with a massive military buildup, announced a strategic defense initiative, all aimed in a sense at provoking the Soviet Union and inviting it into an arms race that he believed they couldn't win. And in the second term, Reagan, in a sense, pivoted and developed this incredible relationship with Gorbachev. I still remember I was moved to tears at Reagan's funeral. Gorbachev kissed the casket.
Right.
So this kind of thing can happen. It's rare, but it can happen, and we should be open to it.
No doubt it is historic. What happens next? Stay tuned. Dinesh D'Souza joining us today from Texas. Sir, thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right. Still ahead on our telecast, we've got Sebastian Gorka, we've got Anthony Scaramucci, David Bossie, and Ben Shapiro. A busy day. You're watching Fox and Friends.